The studio lights blazed as the audience settled into silence, expecting the usual fireworks. Trump leaned back in his chair, flashing that confident grin he had mastered over decades. He was ready to brush off questions, twist answers, and keep the spotlight firmly on himself. But this time, something was different. Across from him sat Denzel Washington, calm but coiled like a spring. The producers hadn't expected the conversation to turn so raw, but Denzel had no intention of wasting his seat. It started fast. "Mr. Trump," Denzel said, his voice steady but sharp, "you built your brand on being a businessman, a builder, a man who creates. But let's be real. You didn't build. You cheated the people who did." The room instantly tightened. Trump smirked, waving a hand dismissively. "Fake news," he muttered. But Denzel leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You stiffed contractors, electricians, plumbers, hard-working Americans who kept your towers standing. The records are public. From Atlantic City casinos to Trump Tower renovations, you left bills unpaid, sometimes forcing small family companies into bankruptcy. Court filings showed over 3,500 lawsuits against you from contractors who said you refused to pay. That isn't success. That's exploitation." The audience gasped. Phones shot up, recording every second. Trump adjusted his tie, trying to recover. "Those were just business disputes," he said quickly. "Happens all the time in big projects." But Denzel didn't let go. "No, this wasn't a few disputes," he shot back. "You dragged painters into court for a few $1,000s while pocketing millions. You cut deals with workers who couldn't afford lawyers, knowing they'd settle for scraps. In Atlantic City alone, hundreds of carpenters and roofers never saw their paychecks, while you bragged about walking away with profits. That's not leadership, it's predatory." The tension was palpable. Even the moderator hesitated to step in. Trump leaned forward now, his grin gone. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. But Denzel didn't flinch. "You're asking America to trust you again," he said firmly. "But if you'll cheat the builders who raised your towers, what's to stop you from cheating the country that raised you?" The studio erupted in murmurs. The challenge was clear. This wasn't Hollywood drama. It was a man holding another man to account, in front of millions. And for the first time that night, Trump didn't have a ready comeback. Trump's smirk froze the second Denzel's words landed. The studio didn't sound like a talk show anymore, it echoed like a courtroom after a damning testimony. The audience leaned forward, the shuffle of bodies and gasps blending into an uncomfortable silence. Denzel leaned in, his finger pressing against the armrest, his voice low but sharp enough to slice through the air. "You cheated builders," he said, the calm tone cutting deeper than if he had shouted. "You stiffed contractors, electricians, carpenters, small family-owned businesses that believed in the promise of your name. You turned their sweat into your wealth, and then walked away while they drowned in debt." Trump raised his hand in protest. "That's not true," but Denzel didn't flinch. "Oh, it's true," Denzel interrupted, his eyes never leaving Trump's. "Kazicki and Sons. Martin Raines. Even the Polish workers brought in without proper papers to demolish your hotel. You promised wages, and you left them with nothing but broken backs and lawsuits. Over $100 million in unpaid labor, Mr. Trump. Tell me, is that leadership? Or just theft in a tailored suit?" The air grew thick, cameras capturing every flicker of Trump's tightening jaw. The crowd murmured, some nodding, some whispering, "Wow," under their breath. The moderator shifted nervously, sensing the heat spiraling beyond scripted banter. Trump slammed his hand on the desk. "I built an empire. I created jobs." His voice cracked on the word empire. Denzel didn't blink. "No, you orchestrated tradesmen. You let others bleed so you could wear the crown. That's not building, that's parasitism. And now you think the presidency should give you strength, when the truth is a real leader gives strength to the presidency." The audience erupted, half in applause, half in gasps. Trump's face reddened, his composure slipping like paint off a cracked wall. The battle lines were drawn, and everyone watching knew this wasn't just a debate, it was a reckoning. Trump straightened his tie, trying to regain control, but the unease was written across his face like a headline. He pointed at Denzel with a forced laugh. "You read from the fake news playbook. None of that is real. Ask anyone who worked with me, they'll tell you I paid, I delivered, I made America proud before I even ran for office." The crowd didn't buy it. Murmurs rippled through the audience, and some even booed. Denzel tilted his head, his calm demeanor cutting through Trump's bluster like a scalpel through fabric. "You think people don't remember? You think they can't Google the court records?" His tone sharpened, and the camera zoomed in on his unwavering stare. "Tell that to the Kazicki family who had to mortgage their future to cover your unpaid bills. Tell that to workers in Atlantic City, the men who took you to court just to receive pennies of what you owed. Even the Trump Taj Mahal was stained with lawsuits. How many more names should I list before you admit you made profit by strangling the very people you promised to elevate?" Trump's hands tightened on the desk, his knuckles white. "I created opportunity," he barked, his voice cracking with desperation. "Without me, those projects wouldn't have existed." Denzel leaned closer, his voice steady, measured, almost surgical. "An opportunity that ends with broken businesses and empty pockets is not opportunity, it's exploitation. You don't lift people up, you step on them. You call yourself a builder, but what you've built is a mountain of betrayal." The audience clapped, some even stood. Trump's face burned red, his jaw working overtime, but no words came. The moderator tried to calm the room, but the momentum was gone. Trump was losing grip, and everyone could feel it. Denzel didn't gloat, didn't raise his voice. He simply sat back, folded his hands, and let the truth hang heavy in the air. "This isn't about business deals, Donald," he said softly but firmly. "It's about character. And character can't be bought, or stiffed on a contract." The studio roared again, cameras catching Trump's glare. He had no comeback, no clever line. For the first time in a long time, he looked cornered. Trump shifted in his seat, his body language screaming discomfort even as his mouth tried to spin control back in his favor. "You act like you know business," he sneered, jabbing a finger toward Denzel. "You're an actor. You read scripts. I've lived the real thing. I made deals, I shook hands with power players, and I came out on top. That's why I belong here, not you." The audience hissed at the insult, a wave of coos and boos echoing across the studio. Denzel didn't flinch. He let the noise rise and settle, then leaned forward, his voice calm but wrapped in iron. "Scripts," he repeated. "Let me tell you about scripts. A script is a plan, words written to tell a story. You, Donald, lived your whole life following a script written for you, born with privilege, surrounded by lawyers to clean up your mess, contractors to build your dreams, and a media machine to sell the illusion. And still, even with that script handed to you, you couldn't pay your debts without leaving others ruined." Trump slammed his fist down. "Lies," he barked, his voice cracking, his face growing darker. "I risked everything, I took chances. On whose back?" Denzel cut in, sharp and fast, not allowing him to breathe. "Because it wasn't yours. You never lifted a single brick, never spent sleepless nights wondering if the check would clear. Those workers did. Those builders did. Families across Atlantic City, New York, and Chicago carried your risk while you collected the rewards. And when the storm came, you walked away richer, leaving them underwater. That's not risk, Donald. That's cowardice." The room exploded with gasps and applause, and for a moment, Trump's carefully constructed persona cracked wide open. His eyes darted toward the cameras, then back at the audience, as if searching for an ally. None came. Denzel leaned back, folding his arms. He didn't need theatrics. The silence between his words spoke louder than any rant. "And now," he said slowly, his eyes fixed on Trump, "you want America to carry your risk again. To bleed for your failures while you stand on stage and call yourself a savior. You cheated builders then, and you'll cheat this country now. That's not leadership. That's theft dressed up in a red tie. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping and shouting. Trump's face tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned pale. For the first time, he looked smaller than the stage around him. Trump forced a laugh, the kind that sounded more like a growl than humor. "Theatrics," he said, raising his voice to drown out the crowd. "This is Hollywood acting at its finest, give him an Oscar for slander." His supporters clapped, but their noise was drowned out by the overwhelming wave of boos and shouts demanding he answer the charges. Denzel didn't rise to the bait. He tapped the desk once with his hand, steady, deliberate. The sound cut through the studio like a gavel. "No acting here," he said, his tone firm but even. "This is real life. And in real life, Donald, there are receipts. Hundreds of lawsuits filed by contractors who said you refused to pay them. Families bankrupted because you wanted another chandelier in one of your casinos. Small business owners who trusted your name, only to learn your handshake was worth less than the paper it was printed on. That's not Hollywood, that's history." Trump snapped back instantly, his face red. "Those lawsuits were nothing. That's what happens when you build big things. People want to cash in, they sue, they lie. That's business. That's how you win." Denzel's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in close enough that the tension in the air thickened. "Win?" he said softly, letting the word hang. "You call it winning when a drywall company in Atlantic City had to fire its workers because you stiffed them out of $100,000? You call it winning when a family-run cabinet maker closed its doors forever after you refused to pay a bill? That wasn't winning for them, Donald. That was devastation. That was betrayal. And you wore it like a badge of honor." The studio erupted again, the audience torn between fury and disbelief. Trump waved his hands, shouting over them, "Fake. All fake. They got publicity, they got attention." Denzel cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. "No, they got silence. They got bills piling up, kids pulled out of college, mortgages they couldn't pay. You stood there with gold on your walls while the people who built them were scraping to put food on their tables. And tonight, you stand here asking America to hand you the keys again." The camera zoomed in on Trump's face. His mouth opened, then closed, his eyes flicking toward the moderators, desperate for rescue. None came. The weight of Denzel's words sat heavy in the room, and even those who had come wearing red caps shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Denzel turned to the audience, his hand gesturing toward them as though delivering a closing argument. "You deserve better than a man who calls cheating a business model. You deserve better than a man who leaves ruins behind him and calls it progress. If he'll betray the very builders who laid his foundation, why would you believe he won't betray you?" The ovation that followed wasn't just noise, it was thunder. The audience sat frozen as Denzel's words echoed through the studio like a verdict no one could overturn. Trump shifted in his chair, tugging at his tie, his signature scowl replacing the forced smirk he had worn seconds earlier. "That's a lie," Trump muttered, trying to reclaim ground, but the microphone betrayed him, amplifying the weakness in his voice. Denzel didn't blink. He leaned back, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable, then struck again, each word sharper than the last. "Tell them how you made promises of luxury towers while local electricians, plumbers, and carpenters begged for payment. Tell them how those small contractors mortgaged their homes to keep up with your delays, only to watch you file lawsuits to avoid paying them a dime." Gasps rippled across the room. Viewers at home typed furiously on social media, hashtags began to climb as clips spread like fire. Trump waved a hand, attempting bravado. "Look, every business has disputes. That's part of success." His tone carried bravado, but his eyes flickered, he knew the crowd wasn't buying it. Denzel leaned forward, his voice low but unshakable. "Disputes," he repeated. "You didn't just dispute, you destroyed. Over $100 million owed to working people who kept their end of the deal. Men and women who poured sweat into your projects while you treated them like disposable tools. And now you want to call that leadership? That's not business, Mr. Trump. That's betrayal. The studio erupted in whispers, a mixture of outrage and awe. Trump's fists tightened on the armrests, knuckles white. Fake news, he shot back, but the words lacked their usual thunder. Denzel didn't flinch. He gestured toward the audience, his voice carrying the weight of every cheated worker. These are facts. Court records. Testimonies. Families bankrupted because one man decided his name was worth more than their livelihood. You cheated builders, why should America believe you won't cheat them too? The silence that followed was deafening. Trump opened his mouth but no words came. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing the rare image of a man cornered by truth. Trump finally forced a laugh, but it rang hollow, a brittle sound that bounced awkwardly around the studio. Denzel, you're just an actor, he sneered, his voice raised in desperation. You read scripts. I built an empire. He leaned forward, stabbing the air with his finger as if sheer force could undo the damage. But the audience wasn't nodding, they were staring, waiting for the counterpunch they knew was coming. Denzel didn't hesitate. An empire, he shot back, his tone calm yet lethal. You built your empire on broken backs and unpaid wages. Real builders don't bankrupt the very people who trusted them. Real leaders don't hide behind legal loopholes while families lose their homes. You call it business, I call it exploitation. The crowd erupted, a mixture of applause and outrage. Phones lit up like fireflies, capturing every second. On Twitter, hashtags surged, hashtag Trump cheated builders and hashtag Denzel drops truth. Within minutes, millions of viewers online were dissecting every frame, every gesture. Trump's face flushed crimson, his composure slipping further. That's not true, he barked. Those contractors were greedy, they overcharged. Greedy? Denzel interrupted, his voice slicing through Trump's protest like a blade. Greedy is a billionaire stiffing carpenters for months of work. Greedy is a man who spends millions on gold-plated elevators but can't cut a check for the very people who made his name possible. You didn't build those towers, you exploited the hands that did. The studio audience gasped. One woman in the front row stood and shouted, "Pay the workers." Cameras swiveled instantly, catching the raw energy surging through the room. Trump shifted uncomfortably, his bluster collapsing under the weight of the moment. This is a witch hunt, he muttered, falling back on a familiar line, but it only fueled the fire. Denzel pressed on, his eyes locked on Trump. If you'll cheat the very people who carried your bricks, why should this country ever trust you with its future? America doesn't need a man who enriches himself by robbing others. America needs someone who lifts people up, not tears them down for profit. The crowd roared, drowning out Trump's protests. On every screen across the nation, one truth was undeniable: the balance of power in that studio had shifted. Trump tried to regain control, slamming his palm on the podium with a force that made the microphone squeal. Enough, he barked, his voice cracking under the strain. I've created jobs, I've built wealth, I've done more than any actor sitting there pretending to know business. His words echoed, but instead of commanding the room, they sounded like a man cornered. Denzel leaned back for a beat, letting the silence hang heavy, then leaned forward again, his voice low but devastatingly clear. Jobs? You mean the jobs you never paid for? The contractors left bankrupt because you refused to honor their work? That's not leadership, Donald. That's theft. The audience erupted again, shouts of, "That's right," and "Pay them back," filling the air. A construction worker in the crowd stood up, holding his hard hat high. "My father worked on your damn projects," he yelled. "He never got a dime." The camera zoomed in, and the man's trembling voice cut through the studio louder than Trump's microphone. Trump's face twisted, a mixture of shock and rage. "That's a lie," he snapped, but his denial was swallowed by the storm in the room. Denzel didn't flinch. You can dismiss me, he said, pointing calmly toward the audience, but you can't dismiss them. These are the voices of the people you've left behind. This isn't Hollywood. This is reality. Social media was ablaze, clips flooding Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter under the tag #BuildersBetrayed. Even networks that normally shielded Trump ran breaking banners, "Contractor Confrontation Live." Trump tried one last defense, his voice trembling, "Every great businessman has disputes, it's just part of the game." Denzel cut him off cold, "Families aren't a game. Livelihoods aren't poker chips for you to gamble with. If you think robbing the people who built your fortune is just business, then America deserves to know exactly what kind of man you are." The crowd rose to its feet in unison, clapping, shouting, demanding accountability. For the first time that night, Trump's shoulders slumped. The power was no longer his. The studio had become a battleground, but the war wasn't between two men, it was between two versions of truth. Trump tried pacing across the stage, his voice rising, hands chopping the air. "You don't know what it takes to build. You don't know the pressure, the lawsuits, the red tape." Denzel stood, his calm presence cutting sharper than Trump's fury. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "Pressure?" he asked, turning toward the cameras. "Pressure is a single mother whose paycheck bounced because your project stiffed her husband. Pressure is a roofer working 16-hour days, praying you'll honor a contract, only to be handed excuses instead of payment." His tone was a blade, slicing past Trump's performance. A chant began in the crowd, "Pay them back. Pay them back." The sound rolled through the studio like a wave, drowning Trump's attempts to shout over it. His face flushed deep red. "You're all being lied to," he yelled, pointing at Denzel. "This man is acting, he's playing a role like he always does." Denzel let the accusation hang for a second before firing back with a line that would trend worldwide within minutes, "If I'm acting, then you're the worst director this country's ever had." The audience erupted, laughter and applause colliding in a thunderous roar. Trump slammed his hand on the lectern again, the desperation plain. "You don't understand business." Denzel didn't miss a beat. "No, Donald. I understand integrity. And that's the one thing you've never been able to buy, steal, or fake." The camera zoomed in tight on Trump's face, beads of sweat glistening under the studio lights. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The crowd erupted again, this time with a standing ovation for Denzel. That 30-second clip would dominate the internet within the hour, replayed, remixed, captioned with one devastating truth: the actor showed the president what real character looks like. The studio audience was still on its feet, the roar refusing to die down. The moderators tried to regain control, tapping their notes, but even they knew history was unfolding live. Trump leaned into the mic, his voice shaking now, stripped of the bravado he carried into the room. "You people don't get it. Without me, half of New York would still be empty lots." Denzel tilted his head, his eyes narrowing with razor-sharp focus. "Empty lots," he repeated, his voice carrying like a sermon. "Donald, you didn't build New York, you burned bridges in it. Every block you touched came with a trail of broken promises, unpaid builders, and contracts torn apart. You want America to forget those scars, but the workers who laid those bricks, they remember. And tonight, so does everyone watching." The audience fell into a heavy silence, not from fear, but from weight. Trump shifted in place, tugging at his suit jacket, looking for footing he no longer had. A cameraman zoomed in on the front row, where a construction worker in a faded hard hat had tears welling in his eyes. He shouted above the stillness, "He never paid us, Denzel. Never." The cry wasn't scripted. It was raw, undeniable truth. Denzel turned toward the man and then back to Trump, his final words cutting like steel. "You think the presidency gives you strength. But strength comes from serving the people, not cheating them. You can't scam your way into leadership. Not anymore." The crowd thundered, cheers, chants, the sound of release from years of bottled frustration. Trump gripped the lectern so tightly his knuckles whitened, but he couldn't drown it out. The moderators exchanged glances, realizing the debate was no longer theirs to control. Clips of the moment spread like wildfire. Headlines that night screamed, "Washington exposes Trump's $100 million legacy of lies." Across social media, hashtags trended worldwide, hashtag pay the builders, hashtag Denzel drops truth, hashtag no more scams. And while Trump's team scrambled to spin the disaster, Denzel had already walked off stage, shoulders squared, leaving behind a room forever changed. Truth doesn't need a stage light, it carries its own. Tonight, we didn't just watch a debate. We witnessed accountability. A man who thought he could bury workers' voices under money and headlines was forced to hear them echo across America. Let this moment remind us all, leadership is not about building towers with unpaid hands, it's about lifting people with honesty. That is the foundation this country deserves.